Alright, in this video I'm going to talk about the cognitive development theory in this week's reading. So, a bit of a background is cognitive development, it explains the way that children develop their mental model of the world. Um, so basically Piaget was the first one to research this. At the time, he didn't agree with um, the way that others, it was believed that um, we were born with the intelligence that we have, that it was a fixed trait. He believed that we actually develop it over time. So he started studying children, and he showed that children think differently because they have a more basic understanding of the world, and as as it develops, our understanding develop as well. Um, so he looked into genetic uh, epistemology, basically the origins of structural learning development, or so he was interested in how kids learned, and not what they learned, but the process in which they developed their knowledge. Um, so that's what cognitive development is. It's how children develop the understanding of the world around them, um, based off of what they already know, and then how they continue to learn and grow throughout their environment. So one of the red words was schemas, which schemas are the building blocks and the way we organize the units of knowledge that we start to as we learn. So so basically, babies when they're born, some we have, was it predisposition? We have existing schemas that we're born with. So basically, if you put a finger or something in a child's mouth, a bottle, the child will start to suck. If you touch the hands, it'll hold. The baby will hold your hand. If you touch their cheek, they lean towards the cheek. Over time, we develop um, more complex schemas. Um, so, for example, if you're gonna to relate to my sports theme, runners will have a schema where they have everything set up. They know that whenever they get ready to run a race, they need to get their shoes, get the right equipment on. They get to the track. They will do their stretches that they have set up. They get on the starting line um, in their starting stance, and then when given the signal, they'll run till the finish line. So over time, our schemas, as we learn something new, different sport, we develop a new schema until we master that schema, and then we'll move into another one. So that goes into assimilation and accommodation. So basically, with assimilation, we try to assimilate all the new information into an existing schema. Right. So babies, as they learn, or kids, they try to take something and relate it to something else. So they always, a good example that I put in here was my son Tucker. When he was younger, we're at the grocery store. He saw an orange, a piece of fruit, and he picked it up because it was round, and he yelled "ball, ball," and he threw it across the grocery store because his existing schema was round is ball. We would play catch, we would roll a ball at him, and he understood ball. So his existing schema being simple, round is a ball. Then that led to the accommodation, where when something doesn't work in existing schema, then they need to modify it for the new situation. So we taught him then that not everything round is a ball, that is an orange. And so he had to adjust the existing schema of round equals ball and change that and say, okay, there are different balls, that not everything round is a ball. And then he had to create a new schema for the orange and for fruit. Um, so, and then equilibrization is that act. So um, when something doesn't align with an existing schema, and they can't assimilate it into that, then it's out of alignment, and you have disequilibrium, liberalization. I think that's the, and then anyway, and then when you're able to accommodate it and create a new schema and master that schema and fit it in there, uh, then that accommodation creates the balance, and that's the equilibrium, and that's where we learn in leaps and bounds. So the stages of development back here. So when we're teaching, normally we want to teach in assimilation, baby steps, try to get it so it's not huge leaps and bounds, but there are times where you want to kind of create that to get them thinking as they grow older. We can start development. This class is getting me to think in leaps and bounds. So the stages of development are sensorimotor, pre-operational, concrete operational, formal operational, and discovery learning. So those five. So the sensorimotor is really when children start to understand the permanence. So when you cover an item, it doesn't just disappear. That the object permanence, the object is still there regardless of if they can see it or not. And that starts developing from the time they're born till about 2. And then you have the pre-operational, where children start to think symbolically. They start to understand. My kids understood red lights while driving were stop signs, and so they start to understand symbols, so they can actually start to S's make, or letters make sounds. Letters represent different things, and then you have concrete operational, where they start to so they start to have logical thought, so they can actually work problems out in their head without having to try things. So for the example, my kids, they didn't quite understand that 2 different glasses in different shapes could hold the same volume of water. Logically, they didn't understand that. So you'd literally have to take that full glass of water and pour it into the other one so they can physically see that it was the same amount of water. Other than that, if it's a tall, skinny glass, it obviously can't hold more water, or the same amount of water as a short, chubby, fat glass. And then you move into formal operational, where children start to think abstractly and logically, so they can start understanding languages, math, and things that culture, things that aren't concrete and physically able to see. So, and that's and then you have discovery learning. So discovery learning is how kids just start developing by exploring and doing and trying. My youngest son, he loves to take things apart and put things together. At 2 years old, the moment he could start moving, he would go and try to discover everything. I remember him playing with my brother's stereo at his house, and my brother's like, he can't turn that on without a remote. I can't barely turn it on with the remote, and within just a few minutes, he had that radio playing loud without a remote. But kids like to explore, like to learn and just try things out on their own. So, based off of that theory, so we should have, if you're in a classroom setting, should be kind of set up as an activity or an active discovery learning. So it should focus on the process of learning, not necessarily, so making sure they understand that process and not necessarily the end product. But as long as they understand the process, Dr. Posey used Common Core as the example of it was supposed to help kids understand the process of math and not just be able to pop out the right answer, right? Making sure they understand how they got that answer and how that works. So you want to use opportunities to create this equilibrium. So throw in small problems that just help them think and have to test the truth and understand it. Um, and then, give them situations where they get to work collaboratively and individually, and try stuff on their own. Um, and then individually evaluate the students and to see how they're learning and to find suitable tasks for them. Later on, I'll talk about in zone of proximal development and experience of jiu-jitsu, which is something I train with on a regular basis, and it's a great way of learning that. We get an opportunity to go through this as we are given a task, and then we just go and try it. We get paired up with a partner, and we get to try it out. We're kind of just shown it one time, and then we get to test it out and see how well it works. And then they'll kind of walk around and see how we're learning, and kind of adjust it depending on where we're at. Okay. So Piaget's theory was different than others at the time. First of all, he was focusing more on, again, the process and the development of learning, and not so much on what the children were actually accomplishing, but how they were discovering it and how they were accomplishing it. He was only studying the children. He wasn't studying adults. So from the time they were born up through till they became adults, he was interested in them. And it has discrete stages marked with levels rather than a slow change. So again, it has discrete levels that, hey, they're now reaching the sensory motor operational. Anyway, that is my understanding of cognitive development.